The danger is to please an immediate public.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Artist Provocateur. I'm Josephat, and today we're talking about 3 artists who defy old established materials in art and who also believe that it's nothing but a bunch of crap. I'm talking about Piero Manzoni, ANDRES SERRANO, and OFILI. Piero Manzoni was an Italian artist whose approach to the avant-garde was rather ironic. His work is often compared to that of Yves Klein. He's famous for a series of works that call to question the nature of the object of art. He has a direct influence on conceptual art later on, and he rejects traditional materials for art and instead chooses materials from rabbit fur to human excrement to create his pieces. He does this in an attempt to, and I quote, tap mythological sources and to realize authentic and universal values. His work is widely seen as a critique on consumerism and mass production after World War II in Italy. He's very influenced by artists like Marcel Duchamp, but also by contemporaries like Yves Klein and Robert Rauschenberg. As a matter of fact, Piero Manzoni's work changed forever after he visited Yves Klein exhibit Ep.07 in Milan, where he exhibited this 11 identical monochromatic paintings. So Manzoni started experimenting with achromatic paintings, what he called achromes. His achromes are pretty much canvases covered with components like gesso or kaolin, which is used to create porcelain, which appear white, but they're actually colorless. So he was not trying to provide a particular hue. He was just trying to use the material by itself. So he did this by just covering the canvases or cutting off shapes that were then painted and applied onto the canvases. His experiments led him to the creation of the later achromes, which are made with white cotton wool, fiberglass, rabbit fur, and even bread rolls. He also experimented with phosphorescent paints and even cobalt chloride, so it would degrade and the colors would change over time. He continued his experiments by incorporating his own bodily products into the art piece. He started using fingerprints and blood and even his breath. In 1960, he presented Corpi di Aria, or Bodies of Air, which is a series of 45 balloons that are mounted on wooden tripods, and they can be blown up by the buyer or the artist depending on how much they're willing to pay for it. Later that year, he presented Consumption of Art by the Art Devouring Public, in which he had 70 hard-boiled eggs that had printed his thumbprint on, and then after eating several, he offered them to the public to eat. The eggs themselves were called uova con impronta, or egg with a thumbprint. Piero Manzoni became obsessed with exploring the limits of physicality and at the same time poking fun at the arts world's own obsession with permanence, while at the same time he was providing this very poignant memento mori. A memento mori is an artistic or symbolic reminder of the inevitability of death. It comes from the Latin. It roughly translates to remember that you have to die. So through the use of this very unusual materials, this very different materials from what's traditionally being used for art, he is actually pointing a light at our own mortality. He's telling us that as these materials that are destined to decay and decompose and disappear, so ourselves are not permanent. And this idea of owning art, for example, comes to question because our own permanence comes to question. Another good example of this is Artist Breath. Artist Breath is another exhibit from 1960 in which Piero Manzoni had a series of balloons that were inflated by him, and then they were attached to wooden bases where he inscribed Piero Manzoni, artist bread. So he's not just talking about this idea of impermanence and exploring this totally new material. He is also, in a sense, asking us to reflect on the way we consume art, on the way that art is turned into a commodity, the way that we value artists as products. Then in '61 came his definite piece, Merda d'Artista, or Artist Shit. It's a series of 90 tin cans sealed with the inscription Piero Manzoni, Merda d'Artista. And the funny thing is they're actually valued, they're priced according to the weight price of gold at the current moment. That is, the price of these pieces is meant to fluctuate as the market changes. Now, there's been a debate on whether or not the cans actually contain the artist's excrement, but here is the funny part. None of these cans have ever been opened, because by opening the can you would actually totally destroy the value of the piece. The cans have since then gone around the world, becoming part of different art collections, and they've been far outstripping inflation that was originally Piero Manzoni's idea. In 2007, one can sold for $150,000, and then in 2015, Tin 54 was sold for $250,000. Now, the ironic part here is, of course, that we're all part of this big joke that Piero Manzoni is playing on the art world. He is very clearly critiquing consumerism and the waste it generates, and at the same time, we have taken this idea and just run with it and transform this critique of a product into a product in itself. Whether or not there's actual excrement in the cans is not even important. What's important is that Manzoni is very cleverly selling us not just an unuseful product, but even a product that we don't want to have. He's selling us this idea of revulsion that lives in our minds, again, because we never look inside the can. He's drawing this invisible line in the sand and saying, I dare you imagine what exists on the other side. So we feel that void. It's us who imagine that shit, that excrement. It's us who fill that receptacle with waste. It's not that we are actually seeing the shit. It's not that we're actually having to experience it, but we do experience it in a symbolic way through his work, through his art. Other works by Manzoni include limited edition thumbprints, declarations of authenticity, for example, that are basically certificates of authenticity that you can buy that turn the owner into part of or a complete work of art, depending on how much you're willing to pay. And he's also declared some people just randomly as works of art gratis, that is released to the public for free, including, for example, Umberto Eco. Piero Manzoni died pretty young in 1963 in his studio in Milan, and very much on brand with his life. His colleague and friend Ben Vautier signed his death certificate and declared it a work of art. Later in the 1980s, Andres Serrano, a photographer and visual artist, became famous for his pictures of corpses and his use of bodily fluids in his work. Andres Serrano has shot an array of subjects, including Klansmen, morgue photos, burn victims. At some point, he went into the subway in New York City and he created portraits of homeless people. Many of his works include bodily fluids, including blood, semen, like his Blood and Semen series, or human breast milk. Within this series of works, there's a series of submerged objects, most famously his work Piss Christ, which is a small plastic crucifix submerged in a glass of the artist's own urine. As a matter of fact, Andres Serrano's work, Blood and Semen 3, is the cover for Metallica's Load album, and his Peace and Blood work is the cover for Reload. In 2013, Serrano created a work called Sign of the Times, in which he collected 200 signs from homeless people paying $20 per sign, and then he arranged them into this collage. He described the work as a testimony to the homeless men and women who roam the streets in search of food and shelter. It's also a chronicle of the times we live in. His work has often sparked angry reactions. During the 1990s, during what's called the American Cultural Wars, Andres Serrano, along with photographer Robert Mapplethorpe or Barbara de Genevieve, became targets from cultural conservatives and politicians, attacked for what they call producing offensive art, while others like the New York Times defended them on the grounds of freedom of expression and the freedom to create art. By far, his most controversial piece is Piss Christ from '87, this picture of the small plastic crucifix submerged in a container of the artist's own urine. This piece was also controversial because it won the Awards in the Visual Arts by the SCCA, which is in part sponsored by the National Endowment of the Arts, a government organization that is dedicated to support the creation of artworks. The work has, of course, generated a lot of controversy on the assertion that it's blasphemous. But of this, Andres Serrano himself has said, "I had no idea Piss Christ would get the attention it did, since I meant neither blasphemy nor offense by it. I've been a Catholic all my life, so I am a follower of Christ." He's also said that it's intended to be a serious piece of Christian art. And he said, and I quote, "What it symbolizes is the way Christ died. The blood came out of him, but so did the piss and the shit. Maybe if Piss Christ upsets you, it's because it gives you some sense of what the crucifixion actually was like." So once again, what Serrano here is doing is humanizing the divine. He's telling us that perhaps we shouldn't be so quick as to disconnect the image of Christ from this idea of waste, of human waste, because there's a very natural, very real way in which the two concepts bridge. Sister Wendy Beckett, who's an art critic and also a Catholic nun, said in a TV interview once that she did not see the work as blasphemous as much as a statement that said, and I quote, "This is what we are doing to Christ." Chris O'Filli is a British Turner Prize winning painter who is better known for his use of elephant dung in his work. He was one of the young British artists, and since 2005 he's relocated and has been working from Trinidad and Tobago. O'Filli utilizes resins, beads, oil paint, glitter, lumps of elephant dung, cutouts from porn magazines as painting elements to create collage. Although his detractors say that he splatters or smears elephant dung, this is actually inaccurate. He most of the time applies it as spherical lumps onto his work, or he creates small structures with elephant dung and turns it into these foot-like structures that sustain his works. O'Filli's paintings also make reference to blaxploitation films and gangster rap, and he's trying to question racial and sexual stereotypes in a humorous way. His work is often called punk art. In '92, he won a scholarship to travel to Zimbabwe, where he studied cave painting, a style that very much influenced his work from that moment on. In 1998, Chris O'Filli won the Turner Prize. He became the first black artist to win the Turner Prize, which allowed him to be part of the Young British Artists. The Turner Prize is the UK's, perhaps the world's most renowned prize for young artists. Only artists 50 or younger can apply. So this was definitely a turning point for Chris O'Filli. Perhaps the most controversial of his works is the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary is a 6x8 painting that was created in '96 as part of his Sensation traveling exhibition. On a yellow-orange background, there is a black woman wearing a blue robe, which is a traditional attribute of the Virgin Mary. The work actually employs mixed media. It has oil paint, glitter, polyester resin, and also elephant dung. There's map pins and collage pornographic images. The central Black Madonna is surrounded by this collaged pieces that look like butterflies, but on a closer inspection, they're actually female genitalia cut out from pornographic magazines. There's a lump of dried elephant dung forming one of the bared breasts, and the painting is actually leaning against the wall, and it's supported by two other lumps of elephant dung that are decorated with colored pins, and the pins are arranged to spell out Virgin and Mary. Many other works by OFILI, including No Woman, No Cry, have the same element of elephant dung turned into the support pieces. This is inspired by the time he spent in Zimbabwe. OFILI has described the painting as a hip-hop version of the old master's depiction of the Virgin Mary. He's emphasized the importance of depicting a black Virgin Mary. And this clash of the sacred and the profane was precisely what set the controversy when the painting first arrived in New York for his Sensation exhibit. The city of New York and the mayor Rudy Giuliani actually brought a court case against the Brooklyn Museum for exhibiting the Virgin Mary. He attempted to withdraw the $7 million City Hall grant from the museum and threatened them with eviction. Also famously, he called the work sick and disgusting. The museum resisted Giuliani's demands, and actually the museum director filed a federal lawsuit against Giuliani for breach of the First Amendment. The museum eventually won the case. Giuliani reportedly claimed that OFILI was throwing elephant dung at the Virgin Mary. He said, and I quote, "The idea of having so-called works of art in which people are throwing elephant dung at a picture of the Virgin Mary is sick." Although the painting was protected with a plexiglass sheet, a protester actually smeared it with white paint. Later that year, there was another protester that was throwing horse manure into the museum, and he called the Virgin Mary's Catholic bashing. In June 2015, the Virgin Mary sold for $4.6 million. That's the end of our video. Before I leave you, here are 5 questions to get us started on our conversation about Manzoni, Serrano, and OFILI. Number 1, can art be used to criticize art? Number 2, can any material, despite its cultural associations, be used for art? Or should there be any forbidden materials? Number 3, why is the idea of impermanence important to art? Number 4, should there be any subjects forbidden to art? Is there anything that art should not be talking about? And finally, number 5, should the government have a say in what kind of art is created? Alright guys, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to leave your comments below, and I will see you next time.